see you later, I'm about to blow this. See you later, see you later, see you later, see you later, I'm about to see you later, see you, I'm about to blow this. See you later, see you later, see you, see you later, I'm about to see you later, see you, I'm about to blow this.
Awesome. So, yeah, welcome everybody. It's good to see a healthy looking crowd for this one. I'm really excited about it. Yeah, we have two awesome speakers this evening. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to both talks. I will just point out a few other items we've got on the agenda. So yeah, I'll just do a bit of industry news and a little nod to our sponsor, and then we will jump into Salma's talk, which is how to prevent the collapse of society by building an accessible web, which is going to be fantastic. I'm really looking forward to that, and I'm sure you'll all agree we want to help prevent the collapse of society. So yeah, there's going to be there's going to be positive results from that talk, I'm sure, in what we do in our work. Then we'll have a short break, And after that, I've just got an announcement about React Advanced London, which is an event taking place later this year. And it's actually more than just an announcement. I actually have 2 tickets to give away. So yes, there's going to be a competition and a chance to win one of those 2 tickets for each of you. And then we'll have our final talk, Records and Tuples, Way More Than Immutability, by Sebastien, who's joining us shortly. And as I said earlier, there'll be a Q&A at the end of both of those talks. So yes, I said that we would acknowledge our sponsor, Pusher, who've been sponsoring us for years, and Alex, who you can probably see on this call, is has been amazing in helping us both organize the events that we had in physical spaces and filming them and putting them on YouTube, and in more recent times setting up the Zoom for us and publishing on YouTube, streaming on YouTube, and then publishing the videos afterwards for people to catch up on in their own time. So what is Pusher? Well, hopefully you're gathering from this text that it's a service which offers real-time capabilities, things like real-time location, charts, presence indicators, notifications, chat apps, and many more things. So lots of different uses for it. Super powerful tool. Please do take a look at it. As you probably guessed, their website is pusher.com. So yeah, please check them out. And Alex, pass on my thanks to the rest of the Pusher crew for supporting us. So yeah, just a little bit of industry news. I'm going to keep this one a little bit more brief than usual because I'm keen for us to get into the talks. But I quite liked the look of this announcement recently from the Chrome team. They have introduced an array buffer inspector into the dev tools. Previously you weren't able to actually see the details of the array buffer itself. You had to kind of painstakingly open each of the individual arrays when you'd set a breakpoint, whereas now you actually have this really lovely display at the bottom where you can make your way through each of the items in the array and actually see what it maps to. In this example, obviously we have some text saying this is an array buffer. You can actually play around with the different bit sizes. Super powerful tool. I had a very brief play with it myself, and another really welcome addition to what is now a pretty huge arsenal of tools inside the inspector. So yeah, check it out if you haven't seen it already. This article is something I wrote recently. I just thought I'd make some of you aware of. It's about unit tests in different modular JavaScript patterns. I encountered a couple of really unexpected challenges over the last few years. Some of you may have encountered this and have your own solutions for it already. But I wrote an article about it just to summarize, I guess, the 2 primary problems I've encountered, one of which is about using stubs and spies with ES6 modules which compile to CommonJS, which I guess is the most common pattern that we've all encountered. When you call one function in another that's in the same module, spying on it can be tricky, or you can encounter errors, and that's because of the way it compiles. So there's a thorough explanation and various solutions that I've put in the article. And then the second one is that actually if you're using native ES modules, and now they're fairly widely supported, they're hopefully being adopted more and more, you'll encounter certain issues or certain challenges using spies and stubs because of the way ES modules work out of the box. So yeah, again, an explanation of the problem there and some solutions. So I'll post the link in the chat afterwards. And then finally, voice search with React was a project I came across recently on SitePoint that I thought I would just share. So not really industry news, but a really fun thing to play around with. So it uses the speech recognition API, which is really new, but really exciting. So basically, voice as data input to a web application is a pretty cool new feature. This demo uses React and it uses a hook for the input and for the data in the demo, which is about a book search. It uses Open Library. So yeah, check it out. It's really, really nice. I mean, I basically just asked for books by Tim Winton, and it listed his entire back catalog. So yeah, really, really fun. The link's down there, but I'll post it in the chat afterwards. So have fun with that one. Yeah, please do follow us if you don't already. So yeah, find us on Twitter, JS Monthly London, all one word. And yeah, if you want to tweet during the talks, please do so. I'll try and keep an eye on the feed. Time for us to jump into our first talk. So we have Salma, who's going to talk to us about how to prevent the collapse of society by building an accessible web. Over to you, Salma.
Hello, everybody. How to prevent the collapse of society by building an accessible web. My clicker has just stopped working. Right. Hi, friends. I'm Salma. I help developers build stuff, learn things, and love what they do. If you've seen me on the internet already, you might know me as White Panther or White P4 Nth3R if you use a screen reader. I am a developer evangelist for Contentful. And if you've never heard of Contentful, it's a headless CMS with a REST API, GraphQL API, generous free community plan limits, and some great CLI tooling and other packages to help you build great stuff. Stephen Hawking said, "I believe that life on Earth is at an ever-increasing risk of being wiped out by a disaster, such as a sudden nuclear war or genetically engineered virus or other dangers." Why does it keep not working? It's 2031. The apocalypse has arrived. The internet is running on a slow 3G connection and display screens are broken. And this is what people are now Googling for: how to build a fallout shelter. And accessibility on the web is paramount to the survival of the human race. So how do we prepare the web for the apocalypse of 2031? And why is this important now? Let's first talk about accessibility for slow connections. There are almost 2 billion websites in the world, and 95% of those websites use JavaScript. And so why is this bad news for the apocalypse? Let's take a look at the network tab of mobile.twitter.com. On the first request, it loads 37 JavaScript files worth 1.44 megabytes compressed, 27 other files, and 9 image files. If we look at Lighthouse DevTools, we'll see that the time to interactive is 5.8 seconds. And the original trace of the page, you see absolutely nothing on that first load. That's a lot of requests for JavaScript, and they're pretty expensive. It takes time to load, plus it might fail. Here's a tweet from 2018, where our monitoring tells us that around 1% of requests for JavaScript on BuzzFeed time out, and that's around 13 million requests per month. That's 156 million failed requests for JavaScript each year for BuzzFeed alone. And that's potentially that many failed JavaScript requests on the web each year, assuming that all websites that use JS have the same traffic as BuzzFeed. In the apocalypse, time to interactive is the difference between life and death. people need to know how to fight off those zombies as quickly as possible. So how can we serve critical content faster? Do we abandon JavaScript? The Jamstack has gone some way to try and solve this problem. The Jamstack is an architecture designed to make the web faster, more secure, and easier to scale. The key feature of the Jamstack is pre-rendering, where the entire front end is pre-built into highly optimized static pages and assets during a build process, and then enhanced with JavaScript. You might have heard of some of the most popular static site generators, Nux.js, which uses Vue, Universal, which uses Angular, and Next.js, which uses React. But does modern Jamstack really solve this problem that we saw with Twitter? Here's my website and the network tab. It's built with Next.js and hosted on Vercel. On a normal load of this site in a browser, it loads more than 30 JavaScript files on the client. The first document to load is the HTML document. But why do we need all that JavaScript when the document has already loaded and the Jamstack is telling us that our pages are pre-rendered and served statically? Let's do an experiment and let's turn off JavaScript on my website. Here it is. You can see the blocked requests in the network tab. JavaScript is disabled, but as you can see, it still loads. It still works. Let's compare this site with JavaScript disabled and JavaScript enabled. The load time for the JavaScript disabled site is 259 milliseconds compared to 793 milliseconds. And that is on a normal, speedy connection in the UK. What if we switched that to slow 3G, which the Apocalypse will be using? The load times are incredibly different. Without JavaScript, 8.67 seconds, and with JavaScript, over 25 seconds. And the sizes of these pages are phenomenally different. 300 kilobytes for no JavaScript versus 1.4 megabytes using JavaScript, and that's uncompressed. That's compressed. The uncompressed sizes are even more greater in difference. 3.6 megabytes to load the same site with JavaScript enabled. I did another experiment to test this theory. I wanted to see how low we can get the size of the page and the load time of the page without JavaScript. So the first thing is I recreated my blog article list, fetching data at build time, statically generated on Next.js, 105 kilobytes loaded in just under 5 seconds. I created the same page, but loaded all the data on the client without JavaScript. We obviously get no content because there's no JavaScript to load it. And it's only slightly less than 92.7 kilobytes, loads in just about 5 seconds again. So what if we could turn this into a static HTML page, no framework, HTML and CSS, no JavaScript, 100 kilobytes, 4.71 seconds. And what's very interesting is that the statically generated Next.js version is actually very, very comparable to my static HTML page. Although my static HTML page does kind of win. So these Jamstack frameworks are pretty good. And so in terms of accessibility for slow connections, you can remove as much JavaScript as possible, harness these Jamstack frameworks, but always use your judgment. I was still able to get the load time and the page weight down. So what I recommend for accessibility for slow connections, websites must work without JavaScript in the apocalypse. Decrease your load time, decrease your page weight, because there is no progressive enhancement in the apocalypse. There's just simply no time. Accessibility for broken screens. In the apocalypse, screens are broken. Everything is a wasteland. You don't see fancy website designs and animations anymore. There are almost 2 billion websites in the world, and 96% of those websites use CSS. And why is this bad news for the apocalypse? Developers.google.com tells us that by default, CSS is treated as a render blocking resource, meaning that the browser won't render any processed content until the CSS object model is constructed. This page recommends that we keep our CSS lean, deliver it as quickly as possible, and use media types and queries to unblock rendering. I say, in the apocalypse, let's not do that, because in the apocalypse, time to interactive is the difference between life and death. How can we serve critical content faster? Do we also abandon CSS? You might have noticed I like tattoos. There's a big saying in the tattoo industry, go big or go home. In this case, I say go small or go die. So let's take that static HTML page and make it as small as possible. Let's remove all CSS and class names. Every byte counts. Let's remove useless font imports. We can't see them on broken screens. Let's remove SVGs. We don't need those bytes. Let's turn these links into just really simple links that don't even need any ARIA labels or anything like that. And a little trick I found as well. I'm going to replace the favicon with a sneaky 0 kilobyte favicon. You might notice that in the network tab, if you don't have a favicon on your site, the browser will throw a 404. I found a little way to make a base 64 encoded string masquerade as a favicon. It's 0 kilobytes. We just put that string into our head and there we go. So here's what my page looks like now. It actually looks pretty well laid out. We've got links, we've got sections, we've got lists, and it actually looks very much like this very iconic website. It's lightweight, it's responsive, and it just works. So how does my no CSS page compare to my HTML with CSS? So here we go. 100 kilobytes versus 4.6 kilobytes. And on slow 3G, 4.7 seconds versus 2.1. And if we look at the Lighthouse performance on web dev measure, everything is 100%. That's going to rank really well in Google search results, and we're going to get to that later. So in 2021, WebAIM surveyed 1 million homepages for accessibility. And across those 1 million homepages, over 51 million distinct errors were detected. That's an average of 51.4 errors per page. So what's going wrong? This seems pretty broken. Here's a breakdown of the most common failures from this report. And let's look at these one by one and see what's going on. Low contrast text, 86.4% of homepages. And what's that caused by? CSS. And we already know we're going to abandon that, but let's have a look. I looked at some of the top 50 websites in the world to try and find these errors, and they were present on quite a few of them. We've got youtube.com, and this violation appears in the little copyright disclaimer on the sidebar. Now, you may think this doesn't matter, really, but let's have a look. We've got the HTML here, and the color contrast error is caused by this CSS rule. The background and the foreground colors do not offer an accessible solution. Using one of my favorite color contrast checker tools, actually built by an ex-colleague of mine, and you can see here that on 3 out of 4 of the criteria, that color contrast fails. If we remove CSS, we don't even need to think about this. Next, missing alternative text for images on 60.6% of homepages. Now, what's this caused by? Directly in the HTML. Now, you're going to see a running theme as I look through all of these failures, and we're going to start going with AliExpress. Now, on AliExpress, there is a rotating carousel on their homepage full of lots and lots of images and links. If we look at the accessibility tree in Chromium DevTools, you'll see that it's just div, 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 link, image, and you get no supporting information in that accessibility tree. Here's the HTML. Div, div, a link with no information, and an image with no alternative text. And what's very, very interesting is that our AliExpress has chosen to hide the whole carousel for screen readers. Maybe with the assumption that if it's hidden, it doesn't matter. And I don't agree with that. AccessibilityDeveloperGuide.com says whenever you think about hiding something from any audience, better ask yourself whether this is really a good solution. Most of the time, it's better to create a solution that works the same way for everybody, and which does not need any shaky ARIA. Let's look at the fix for this violation on AliExpress. Add an alt tag. This is a great image description, and we'll get to this later, but if you want to avoid cumulative layout shift, add a height and width on the image as well. Missing form input labels on 54.4% of home pages. Again, caused by incorrect HTML. I spent a long time trying to find an example of this, and what's interesting is that if a placeholder is present in the input field, screen readers and accessibility trees kind of get around that and give you some information. However, I did put a call out on Twitter to ask if anybody had any examples of HTML forms without labels and placeholders. Wonderful member of the community, Alex, said he had a gimmicky one on his 404 page to do redirects. And this was like gold dust to me. This was an absolutely abysmal experience for screen readers. And let's look at what's happening. It looks pretty cool. There's some ASCII art. The instructions are to press enter to continue, which redirects you to Alex's homepage. Here we go. Here is what the HTML looks like. We have a form, we have an input field, we have no labels, we have no placeholders, and in the accessibility tree, we have no information. And furthermore, when you focus on this element with voiceover on Mac, it reads out to you, edit text blank main. It's not really what you're expecting when you land on a 404. So my question is, does this page really need a form? Is this HTML giving meaning to what needs to be done on that page? Furthermore, a fun little Easter egg, if you focus on the ASCII art in its current state with voiceover, it reads this out to you. Underscore, new line, forward, slash, space, underscore, space, backslash, space, underscore, 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 etc. And there is a good fix for that, where you can use ARIA labels and roles to allow the screen reader to know what that is. You add role equals image and an ARIA label, and you focus on that now with a screen reader, you get more contextual information about what's on the page. It's a pretty fancy page for a 404. I think I'd prefer my 404s to be functional, especially when we're in an apocalypse. And for a moment, let's talk about placeholders. As I mentioned earlier, placeholders actually are not labels. W3schools.com says the placeholder attribute specifies a short hint that describes the expected value of an input field, e.g. a sample value or a short description of the expected format. Let's go back to AliExpress. When you refresh the page on AliExpress, you get a new contextual placeholder. It told me to search for true love, Starbucks, fancy underwear, and car accessories. In the accessibility tree, the placeholder says true love, which is fair enough, but there is no label on the form. If I focus on that input with a screen reader, I don't actually know what that form is for, especially when the placeholder is changing every load of the page. Without a label, that placeholder is meaningless. So what does a good form input look like? We have a label, and we tell the HTML, the DOM, what input that label is for using the for and the ID attributes. We give the input a contextual placeholder, here it's first name, and that is going to really help you out when you can't see that screen. Let's go on to empty links. 51.3% of home pages, again, caused by HTML. And we'd go back to AliExpress. In the footer of AliExpress, there are a set of social links. They are empty. They are full of non-breaking spaces. And the accessibility tree tells us no information apart from space when we focus on those links. And as a screen reader user, as someone without a working display, I'm going to ask myself, what will happen if I click on this link? And it's not just empty links that are problematic. Let's take a look at the basket icon on AliExpress again. There is a text of 0 inside that. When I'm hovering over that with a screen reader, when I'm focused on it, if I've gone through the input field that says true love, I go to there, the basket icon, and it just reads out 0. Here's the HTML, a link, an icon, and 0. And when I focus on it with a screen reader, it reads out to me, link, 0. I don't know where that link's going. I'm not going to want to click on it. I'm going to be asking myself again, what even is this? Let's look at the fix. Add an ARIA label onto the link. Make it descriptive. How about you have 0 items in your basket? Go to basket. Tell the user what they're going to do if they click on that link. Missing document language attribute, 28.9% of home pages, again, caused by the very opening tag of your HTML. AccessibilityDeveloperGuide.com says, in the example of a screen reader, the synthesizer needs to know which language the content is in order to pronounce the output correctly. Otherwise, it will be hard to understand, even if you know the other language. We go back to AliExpress, and here you can see Axe DevTools, great free Chromium extension to test accessibility. There is no language attribute on the HTML. And you can see here, AliExpress have prioritized merging the Facebook and Open Graph schema into their HTML before they've thought about language. The fix, very simple. Lang equals whatever your language is on the HTML. And finally, we come to empty buttons, 26.9% of home pages, again, caused by HTML. But in this case, it's also caused by CSS, which we're going to abandon. We go to a product page of AliExpress, and there are 2 buttons on this page that presumably increment and decrement the amount of items you would like to add to your basket. When using VoiceOver, when you focus on this element, it just reads out button. No one is going to click that if they don't know what it's for. Here is the HTML. It's a button element with an icon element inside it. So how is that plus and minus added? With CSS pseudo elements. And what's really interesting is this character is not actually supported by a lot of browsers and also my VS Code. I presume they mean a plus, but literally in the CSS inspector, the character is unrecognized. And I had to bring the what duck out for that. The fix, give a fallback to your button, put a plus in there, give it an ARIA label that tells the users what they're going to do when they click on that button. Give it some meaning. So when we have a look at all of these most common failures, they're caused by incorrect CSS and HTML that are not built for accessibility. So what do we do for accessibility for broken screens in the apocalypse? Don't fake content with CSS. Put it there in the DOM. Use semantic HTML. Use forms where it's appropriate. Don't break the web. Because if the web is unusable in the apocalypse, everyone dies. So we're talking about the apocalypse, 2031, it's 10 years off. But why is all of this important now? Let's quickly recap. How do we prepare the web for the apocalypse of 2031? We start with semantic HTML, we use minimal CSS, and we use as little JavaScript as possible. And why is this important now? Worldwide, the internet is slow. WorldPopulationReview.com did a survey, internet speeds by country in 2021, and the average speed in the world is 55.13 megabits per second. If we look at the code from Chromium DevTools, the slow 3G simulated connection is 51.2 megabits per second. And these are pretty much the same. So all of the results you've seen when I had slow 3G in my DevTools, loading that page with JavaScript, the results are going to be very similar for a lot of people around the world. They are not going to survive if pages take that long to load. Furthermore, globally, at least 2.2 billion people have a near or distance vision impairment. I'm one of them. I have really bad eyes. I can't see. Those of you who have seen me live streaming know that I miss placeholders all the time when they are really low contrast. And also, not all users of screen readers have vision impairments. Here's a survey by WebAIM, it's 2017, and it shows here that not everyone is blind who's answered this survey. Some people have cognitive disabilities, some people are deaf, some people have motor disabilities. So it's not just blind people who use these. There are a lot more people you're affecting if you don't build accessible websites. And lastly, as of this month, Google now uses Core Web Vitals as a ranking factor in search results. So what are the core web vitals? We've got the largest contentful paint, which means how quickly does the page render? We've got the first input delay. How quickly does the page respond to user input? And we've got cumulative layout shift. How stable is the page layout? So in order to make the most out of search rankings and Google Core Web Vitals, what do we need to do? We need to get our content to our users as fast as possible. We need to make our web applications usable as soon as possible. And we need to make our web applications as stable as possible, or we risk being forgotten in the apocalypse. Billions of people use the internet on a slow connection, and millions of people use the internet via a screen reader. People won't find your website if it's not performant or accessible. The apocalypse of 2031 might not happen, but if it does, hopefully with this information, we'll be prepared. My name is Salma, or White Panther. I encourage developers to build stuff, learn things, and love what you do. You can find me on all of these social platforms as White Panther. And thank you very much. I've had a lovely time.
Fantastic. Thanks, Salma. That was awesome. Yeah, so good. Yeah, there's been an interesting chat going on actually while you were talking. So yeah, lots of topics in your talk that people have got excited about. And yeah, I don't know, Nia, did you want to ask your question? I can see some round of applause. Absolutely. Awesome talk. Yeah, Nia, did you want to ask your question? Do you want me to ask it for you? You're getting lots of big ups. Hey, Nia.
You hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hello.
I can't hear you because I wait a second. Okay, you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So sometimes I need to add images to my webpage, but they are only for styling, you know, to see only images that doesn't have the meaning. And I wonder what is the best, how to make it apocalypse ready, you know. Usually I add the alt attribute with the empty string because I don't want the screen reader will read it, but I wonder if there is a better way.
So my question to you would be, if you're going to hide these images from screen readers, is it really important to the content of the page? Does the page need that contextual image information in order to make sense? And if it doesn't, get rid of it. That's what I would say if you want your website to be apocalypse ready.
Okay, thank you.
My pleasure.
Awesome. What else is coming in? Oh, there we go. Question from Matt. Do you want to read it out, Salma?
From Matt. Oh, you described the HTML page loading at a similar speed to the Next.js page. Please, where was the HTML page hosted? So all of those 3 pages that I compared were all hosted on Netlify. So I wanted to host them on Netlify to make sure I was kind of giving an even comparison. And obviously the HTML page was just a page dragged into Netlify that was then hosted via just static, here's your HTML. And then the next pages were obviously built and then served by Next as they do. So it's an interesting one for sure. I would probably say like the Google fonts, the favicon, and the CSS were the main culprits of that. The HTML static page being actually a lot bigger than I would have thought at that point. And the favicon, especially 15 kilobytes, is a lot to take up on a small page like that.
Oh, does that oh, there you go. Yes, it does answer your question. Fantastic. I have a couple actually for you, Sam. Yeah, my first one was about yeah, I suppose it's about my frustration, or perhaps our shared frustration at how common some of those errors were that were picked up in that report. And that report was really interesting, by the way. All those stats were super helpful for making a case, you know, to make the web better. In particular, you know, missing labels from forms, real bugbear of mine, drives me nuts. Why do you think, given how easy it is now to automate, you know, a certain level of accessibility testing? I'm not saying that solves every problem, but you know, things like that will certainly be picked up by accessibility auditing tools, you know, and can be part of your whole CI process. What do you think it is that's still missing in the industry?
So this is a tough one. So I used to work in product development as a tech lead. And I think what used to see a lot of was designers would design these beautiful pages with fancy animations and crazy forms and just all this beautiful, it looks beautiful when you're looking at it in Figma or Photoshop. And then I think as a good developer, you want to make that design look great. You want to stay true to what the designer's vision is. And so, especially if you're somebody who hasn't had that much experience in investigating accessibility issues, you're going to build it and, oh, the designer says it's great, so let's just build this and ship it and it's great. And so a lot of people actually in the industry are kind of saying sometimes designers need to code, or they need to have that experience of those kind of issues in accessibility. And I would say it's a joint team effort. So developers learn about accessibility, learn about your users and how you need to cater for those. And also designers learn about that too and talk about it, make that a core factor in how you design stuff. I would always say that an MVP should be like an MUP, a minimum usable product. I kind of just made that up and it sounds pretty good. And so it is also the responsibility of the companies and the product teams and those developer teams to prioritize that, and the testers to prioritize that. But sometimes I've been in this situation, accessibility isn't in the budget, or quick, we've got to ship this feature really, really quickly. I don't care if it's accessible. We need to get this out to customers and they need to use it. And so I think it's an industry problem in that it's not being prioritized by product managers, and there's no business case for accessibility. And so it falls upon the developers to promote it, and they don't get heard because they've just got to keep shipping features. It has to start like a little bit higher, I think. So it's an industry problem. That's what I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it's really interesting what you say about the business case. I mean, maybe the business case is something people can't easily reach for, but it's definitely there. I mean, the stats that you talked about, you know, that there's readily available information about the number of people who have visual impairments or prefer to use the keyboard, or, you know, whatever it is. So yeah, I mean, that's particularly for e-commerce, you know, as a great example, right? I mean, if your business, you know, is oriented around taking money online and people can't check out because they can't use it, then yeah, there should be. Yeah,
it's also very interesting that you know, in the product development worlds I've been in, there's so much data being collected about users, how long they've been on a page, where they click, bounce rate, what they scroll down to. But actually the data that is important for websites to be usable isn't as often collected. And so that goes on the analytics team as well. It's a whole product responsibility to understand how to make these websites better. It's quite interesting that even though AliExpress is in the top 50 websites in the world, it has so many problems.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, looks like we've got another question from Nir about, yeah, there was a conversation in the chat.
Actually,
do you want to go?
Sorry, before we move on,
Jacob, did you have one first?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about the business case for accessibility, and people
Sure.
saying that like that they can't justify, or it's hard to justify spending the money on it. So there are quite a lot of people who have like a persistent disability, but there are actually significantly more people who have a temporary disability. So like you've broken your wrist, or you've, I don't know, gone to the eye doctor and got eye drops or something. There are millions of people around the world who have a disability that only lasts for a short period of time. And those people are actually significantly less adapted to situations where accessibility is not a focus. So they're less adapted to dealing with those sorts of problems. So if you're ignoring accessibility, you're also ignoring the person sat next to you who tomorrow slips on the ice, well, not tomorrow, but slips on the ice and sprains their wrist, and now they only have one hand.
Exactly, you make a really good point. I think a lot of people think accessibility concerns are only for the people who are disabled now, and it's for everybody. And the more we realize that, and the more we talk about that, and the more we get, and I hate to say this, the more we get buy-in from the top, but that's where it's going to come from in this capitalist world, the more people will probably start advocating for it. You're right.
Yeah, thanks, Jacob. And nice to hear your voice again. Hope you're keeping well. Nir, you made well, you posted another question and made a really interesting point, actually. I think there's kind of two questions in there. So there was a conversation about wrapping form inputs with labels so that you don't have to use an ID. Is that, yeah, does that work across all screen readers? I think is that question.
I don't actually know the exact answer to that, but what you can do, so Nia asks, is there a tool like can I use for Ali that allows me to know this? So I would recommend using a variety of different accessibility tools throughout your workflow, because not every accessibility tool is going to give you the 100% correct answer. Sometimes you get false positives. Sometimes you get stuff that actually is not an issue. For example, on my website, I have a hidden link in my header that you can't see, but it's for screen readers to skip over the navigation to the main content. Whenever I look at my site on Axe DevTools, it tells me that the color contrast is bad, but it's meant to be like that. So you have to use your judgment, you have to educate yourself, and you have to use a variety of different tools to get a variety of different answers. Some of the ones that I use are Wave Evaluation Tool, Lighthouse Tools, Axe DevTools, and I read up a lot on the WebAIM and WCAG stuff as well, and try and keep up to date, because it's always changing as well. The web is always changing.
Awesome. We actually have two more questions. This is turning into an epic Q&A, which is great. Everyone was really engaged. So yeah, there was another one from Matt, which is about best website resources for covering JS performance optimization.
I don't know actually off the top of my head. I would recommend to sign up to Stefan Udis's newsletter, who's in the audience right now, who always gives amazing knowledge nuggets out every week. I didn't mean to plug him, but I'm doing it. So follow as many of these people as possible who are just talking about it. And the thing with web development is that no one really knows what they're doing. We're all trying to just gather information, investigate, and try and understand the web as best we can. And things are always changing, and there's new frameworks coming out, and blah, blah, blah. If you can just keep in mind the things that I talked about in my talk, just forget CSS if you don't need it, forget JavaScript if you don't need it, and just focus on making your website as quick as you can. Use your judgment, use the tools, because there's no one size fits all. There's no golden nugget to make this. You've just got to play about and experiment and understand.
Yeah, great. I'll post some links, some favorite links of mine in the chat afterwards. And yeah, I'm sure someone, if you dig anything out, that would be really appreciated too. We've still got questions coming in, so we've only really got 2 minutes before our break. So do you want to pick one to answer, Salma? Shall I pick one for you?
Does ignoring accessibility features lead to any delay in deploying new technology to the website, such as a data analyst or connecting to personal assistant software? I don't think that, I don't know how to answer that. Ignoring accessibility just makes your product substandard.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a tricky question to answer. I suppose if there are accessibility checks in the delivery process, then yeah, then any kind of failure would slow it down. If there's no checks, then I guess it just ships with flaws in it, as you say.
Yeah. I mean, I think what's key to understand in this world that we're in, it's like, get this stuff out, quick, ship, quick, react. Be reactive and not proactive, and I think we have to switch it a little bit more. No one's going to die if you don't get your feature out in the next hour, and if you can spend a few more hours or a couple more days testing it thoroughly and properly. And also what I would advocate for is actually getting people with those disabilities to test your products. You know, where are all the people who are working in tech who have those disabilities, who can actually give us real life data about what it's like to use these products? I was streaming on Twitch a couple of weeks ago, and I had someone come into my chat who was blind, and I was fascinated because they were using a screen reader in my stream. They were telling me all the difficulties they have on the web and what things are good and what things are bad, and it's so eye-opening to talk to these people who face these problems every day.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I've myself used the RNIB in the past to help test software. That was really fascinating experience. Yeah, great suggestion. We can probably just end on the final comment, which is someone getting really pumped about your t-shirt. So yeah, the question is, where did you get it?
Go to my website, whitep4n3r.com, and click on merch, and you can go and buy t-shirts, sweatshirts, mugs. And I give away merch on my giveaway Fridays as well, if you want to turn up to my Twitch chat and hang out.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to thank you so much again for such a great talk and for fielding so many interesting and different questions from everyone. It looks like there's even possibly still more coming in. So if you're going to hang around and you're happy to answer them in the chat, that would be awesome.
I will do. Yes, I will do. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.
Bye.
So virtual round of applause, not an easy thing to
Okay.
Cool. Yeah, well, thanks everyone for being patient, and many thanks for Sebastien for joining us. Where are you calling from, Sebastien?
I'm from France. Hello, everyone.
So you're dialing in from France.
Yeah.
Yeah, this event's just getting more and more international every time we do it. Yeah, thanks so much for joining. I'll hand over to you to do your talk now on records and tuples. So yeah, thanks again for being here.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. No problem. So I'm going to talk about records and tuples, and I'm going to explain why this is an important proposal to the JavaScript language. So first, to introduce myself, I'm Sébastien Lorber. You can follow me on Twitter or read my blog post if you want. I've been a developer for maybe over 10 years and a React early adopter a few years ago. I've been a freelance for 4 years now, and last year I had the opportunity to work for Facebook on Docusaurus, which is a documentation static site generator, which permits to easily deploy documentation online by just writing markdown files. So today I'm going to talk about records and tuples. It's a proposal to the ECMAScript language, which is somehow JavaScript. How does it work? It is a proposal that is on the TC39 committee, which is the committee that is responsible to make evolutions to the JavaScript language. It is currently in stage 2, which means it's already quite advanced. And people know about this proposal for being new immutable data structures that will be native to JavaScript. But I think the most important part of this proposal is not widely known. It's more about the compound primitives behavior, which has a lot more impact for me than just being immutable data structures. So tonight I'd like to explain to you why I think this proposal is very important and what are the many advantages for JavaScript in general and in particular React. So to explain a bit how the JavaScript language evolved over time, there is the TC39 committee, which is part of ECMA International Working Group. So it's a group of persons responsible to discuss the evolution of JavaScript. And so there are proposals that are in multiple stages. So the first stage is the ID. You just have an informal ID that you submit to the committee, but you have to be a member of the committee to be able to submit such IDs, because otherwise it would be quite messy. The stage 1 is you have a formal proposal, which is not a specification, but is somehow an ID, but described in a more formal language with some API and examples. The stage 2, you have a draft specification, which means that you now use a very formal language, which is quite hard to understand if you already read a specification from ECMAScript. You also have polyfills. You also have available Babel transforms that should be available. Somehow, from the stage 2, you can start to play with the proposal in a sandbox or locally if you try to load polyfills and things like that. The stage 3 is more advanced. You already have a quite stable specification. You are waiting for the last feedbacks to the proposal to make last-minute changes before it is a part of JavaScript. Also, TypeScript will start to implement the proposal at stage 3. And also, browser vendors tend to start implementing the features, and maybe Node.js if it's meaningful for Node.js and things like that. So it's not, we don't know exactly, I don't know exactly how the browser vendors choose to implement a feature or not, but generally at this stage they start to think about it, and because the proposal is quite likely to end up in JavaScript. And so when it reached the stage 4, the proposal is completed, and it will be in the next ECMAScript version. So today I want to talk about records and tuples. Let's present what this is. Somehow it's like regular objects and arrays. So you are already used to these structures in JavaScript. If you look at a record, you can see that it's quite similar to an object in JavaScript. You can create it, but it has a hash syntax as a prefix. You can log it like an object. You can access an attribute like an object. You can update it in an immutable way like an object, but something different is that you can't reassign an attribute of this record because it is immutable. So the tuple is quite similar, but it's more like an immutable array. You can create an array with the hash syntax, and it is now a tuple. You can log it to see the values of your tuple. You can access a value at a given index, but you can't reassign a value at a given index because it is immutable. And something interesting is that all the methods that are available on the array, like filter, sum, every, and things like that, are also available on the record. So somehow it's quite easy to interpret a record by an array and vice versa if you don't do any mutation on it. You can also update it in an immutable way by using the spread syntax to change the value at a given index, to add or append or prepend a value to this tuple. So what you need to understand is that the hash syntax is just a shortcut. What you can do is also use the global record constructor or the additional methods like from entries or tuple.from, which permits to create records and tuples from a list of entries. You can also nest records and tuples in a deeply nested way. So you can create a record that contains tuples and records and recursively. But there is something that is forbidden. You can't put non-primitive types inside a record. So for example, if you try to put a regular object inside a record, you will have an exception that says that the object is not a primitive type, so you can't put it inside a record. It's the same for many types in JavaScript, like a date. It is not a primitive type, and it is actually immutable. A class is also not a primitive type, and a function is also not a primitive type. So what are the primitive types that you can put in a record? When I say record, I mean records and tuples because it's a bit complicated to say this. What can you put inside a record? You can put all the primitive types like string, number, boolean, begin, symbol, undefined, null. And also you can put records and tuples inside each other because records and tuples are considered as compound primitives, so somehow they are primitives too. Now let's talk about the most important part of the proposal. It's about the identity of the records and tuples. So let's see how it compares to objects and arrays. If you have, for example, two object instances which have exactly the same content, you can try to use the triple equal operator to see if the two object instances are equal, and it will return false because these are two distinct instances. The two objects are different identities, and if you modify one, you don't modify the other, and vice versa. But if you use the triple equal operator for one attribute, like the value 1, which is a primitive type, the value 1 of the first object and the value 1 of the second object are equal, because the primitive types are always equal when their values are equal. And in the same way, if you look at the B attribute, you can see that the array which contains 3 and 4 are contain exactly the same for both objects, but again, the two arrays have different identities. So the triple equal operator will return false in this case too. Now let's see how what's the behavior for record and tuples. This is very different from objects and arrays, because if two records have exactly the same content, it's guaranteed that the triple equal operator will return true. So somehow the records and tuples are compound primitives, because the primitive values, if they have the same value, they are always equal, and the records and tuples, if they have the same value, they are also always equal. So this is very important to understand, because it has a lot of implications for, in particular, React. I will explain later with some demos, so that you can understand what this means for React in particular. Now let's talk about the interoperability. Records and tuples are very interoperable with JSON, because JSON only contains primitive values. It can contain arrays, it can contain strings, numbers, and things like that. So somehow a JSON object is an object which contains generally just primitives, but you can easily convert it to a record, because all the values inside JSON are compatible with, are convertible to a record. And if you have an object or an array, it's not always compatible, because, for example, your object may contain a function, but this is not the case for JSON, because a JSON file can't contain a function. It can only contain strings and numbers and things like that. So even if you have nested objects and arrays inside the JSON object, they are easily convertible to a record or a tuple, because you can use the from and from entries methods to do the conversion. So how do we update records and tuples? It's still, if you are used to immutable data structures, in particular in React, you know that it can be a bit complicated to update objects in an immutable way, particularly if you have nested attributes. You have to use a lot of spread syntax to spread the previous values and mutate the new attributes that you want to change. So with records and tuples, it's not going to be easier. You still have to use this syntax, and you will still need to use a library like maybe Lodash or Emerge.js. I don't know exactly how these libraries will support records and tuples when the time will come. But there is a child proposal to records and tuples, which will permit to use a new syntax that will be much more convenient to update the libraries in the records and tuples in a nested way. And I think it will remove the need for libraries like Emerge.js if you have ever used it. Even the creator, Michael Westrat, was quite happy to see this proposal, because he thinks that it deprecates the library that he created. Now let's talk about the benefits of records and tuples for React. I think it has many benefits. I will just explain 4 of them. For example, the security, the behavior, the performance, and the API surface. So let's talk about the security. You know that when you use React, that it's not a good practice to mutate the props that you receive. Now, if you receive records as props, you can't mutate them. So if you try to, for example, if you receive a profile prop in your React component and you try to modify the name, you will not be able to do this, because you will get an exception if you try to do that. So somehow it's already possible today if you use object freeze in a deeply nested way to have the same security. But I think it has a cost to use a library to do that, and it's better if it can be native to JavaScript. So this is an additional security that you get for free. Now, more importantly, some behavior impacts. So let's imagine that you have a React component like that. You are creating an API filters object from 2 other objects. One is user filter and the other is company filter. And you use this API filters object as a dependency in a React effect. So what will happen here the thing is, every time this component renders, the API filters object is recreated, so it has a different identity each time it renders, and the use effect will have this API filters object in the dependency array. So the use effect will trigger the effect for each render, which will fetch the user and company data, which will then set the result in the component state. And then the component will render, and the API filters will be recreated, which will re-trigger the use effect, and it will create an infinite loop. So the thing is, if instead of using an object, you use a record here, you will not have this infinite loop, because as long as the API filters has the same, contain exactly the same data, for example, the username is Sebastien, you will not have the use effect will not re-execute, because the API filters object identity will keep being the same. So the dependency array will React will be able to understand that it is not worth it to run the effect. So this, I think, here for such a use case, records and tuples are very interesting, because it will solve a lot of bugs that we have in React applications today, where the hooks tend to re-execute not always when we want, because we have the objects and array identities that are constantly changing. And there are even libraries that were created by people like MC-Dots to prevent infinite loops in React applications. For example, you can use deeply equal effect or something like that, which will compare the previous API filters with the next one with a deep equality check to see if the object contains the same data. There are a lot of solutions like this to try to solve this problem currently, but I think records and tuples is a very idiomatic solution to this problem to solve. You just have to use records and tuples whenever you can, and the problem is solved a lot of the time. So in the same way, you have potential performance benefits. It's quite similar to the use effect here. Imagine you get a user and a company, and you are trying to create a user and company object in your React component, and then you pass it as prop to another component which is memoized. So what you expect is that the user and company view component here is optimized with React memo, and you don't want it to remember to render if the data has not changed. But the thing is, if you create a new user and company object identity every time the app render, the user and company view will not be able to optimize the rendering, because it receives a new object user and company instance, which will trigger the re-render again and again, and you have a lot of wasted resources for that could be optimized if you just use a record. Because if you use a record here, the user and company object will have a much more stable identity, and the user and company view, will be able much more easily to optimize the rendering, because it always receives the same object, and the React memo is able to understand that and block the rendering. So in a similar way, I think there are benefits for the API surface. It's not already decided what will be the syntax for TypeScript. So this is just some syntax that I invented. There is no immutable record in TypeScript. Actually, there is a record already, so there is some kind of conflict, because it's not sure how TypeScript will introduce records and tuples, because there is already a record type, which is not an immutable type. It's more like an object. So with TypeScript, I think there are benefits, because you will be able to tell React, for example, that your component only accept immutable a record instead of a regular object. And somehow it is more explicit, because now you will be able to use maybe hooks that really need to receive stable identities. it's very easy in React applications to have bugs where, for example, you create a hook and you know that the hook will only work if, for example, the parameters you pass to it are stable. So if you always pass new identities, maybe the hook will trigger weird things like unwanted side effects and things like that. Now you have the ability to use with TypeScript a more explicit API contract to say, hey, I'm creating an API here. I want you to provide me very stable identities. If the data doesn't change, don't pass me objects that are different, because I expect you to provide me stable objects somehow. So this is a bit complicated to explain all that. So I'm trying to. I'm going to show you 2 real-world demos so that maybe you will understand better how records and tuples will solve such problems. So let's see. Let's look at the demos. Wait a minute. Yeah. So this is a React application. I'm going to run it soon. So for now, I'm just showing the code. We are creating a list of user. You can see that there is the user list component here. It receives the users as props, and then it just loop over the users, and it will render the user list items here. You can see that all the components are memoized to optimize the rendering. Now let's see the application that I'm going to. Maybe it's a bit too big because we don't see it as a whole. So the application that I'm going to run is going to fetch the list of users from a backend. Actually, it's from a fake API method because I don't have a backend for this demo, but let's think about calling a backend. We are going to have filters on the application. I will have, for example, the ability to filter by name and to filter by sex. And we are going to see the problem that I described about the infinite loop. So if we run this application, let's see what happens. You can see on this side that the application here is working. But you can see on the log, there is something happening. You can see there is an infinite loop. It keeps fetching the users again and again. So basically, if you use this in the real world, you are going to query your backend every second because there is the infinite loop in the use effect. So what happens here? The problem is that you have the list of users here, but the thing is, every time you refetch the users from the backend, what happens is that the backend is giving you a different object identity. So this is something that can be surprising, but every time you refetch the list of users, even if the list of users didn't actually change when you deserialize the response from your backend, you always get a new object identity. And as you get a new object identity, you will trigger, no, sorry, this is not what I wanted to say. No, so I melted with another demo. So what I wanted to say is that here you can see that the filters is a composition of the name and the sex filter. So for example, here I have the name, I can type Sébastien. And it is able to filter, but you can see that it triggers an infinite loop. Now I can also filter by sex, it works. But this is not the, this doesn't, you can see that there are still this infinite loop problem. So now let's see why this problem happens. It's because the filters object here is always a new object that is different from the previous one. And the dependency array here is going to have this filters object because we need this filter to fetch the data from the backend. And it is going to create the infinite loop because it then sets the results, which then re-trigger the render, which then recreates the filters object here. Now, if we just use the hash syntax in front of the object here, what you can see here is that the infinite loop has stopped to render, and now, for example, if I just change the filters here, I am able to call the backend with the new filters, and the backend is only called when the filters change, and there is no infinite loop anymore. So now this is the demo. So there are implementation details that I don't show because it's not very important. It's more, I think the important part is this line in particular that permits to avoid this infinite loop. And I think it's quite common to actually create objects and pass them to dependency arrays by mistake, and it can lead to a lot of problems if you are familiar with React. Maybe you already saw these problems before. So now I'm going to present another demo. This demo, we have a user, which is we have a user component that is optimized. We can see that there is React memo here. You hear me? Yeah, okay, sorry. So there is React memo because we want to optimize the rendering. There is also a component on which we use React memo because we want to optimize the rendering. And there is the user and company component also optimized, which will use the user and company independent components to render. Now I have another application. What we will do is that we are going to fetch the data from the backend every second and set it to state, and then render the user and company. And we are going to track also when the components will render. So what you can see here is that I'm refetching the data from the backend every second, and the data doesn't change much. Only my age is incrementing every 5 seconds. But what you can see in this demo is that even if the data barely change, all the components constantly re-render because there is something wrong here. And the thing is, every time you call your backend API, it returns a new object. For example, if you fetch the data from the backend and you call fetch response.json to get the JSON object back, it will give you a different object identity, even if it contains exactly the same data as it used to contain the previous call. You will get a new object identity, and this object will be set in the React state here. You will pass this object as a prop in this component. And despite the user and company, the user and the company component being all three optimized with React memo, you will have all the components re-render because all the objects from the new backend response have actually different object identities. So this is quite something that happens quite often in real-world applications because, for example, you might want to refresh the data when you navigate. You might say, for example, when the user clicks on the navbar, I want to refresh the user data because I want to be a bit pessimistic and maybe his avatar has changed in another tab or whatever, or you want somehow to keep fresh data in your UI. And the thing is, every time you refresh the data from the backend, you are going to waste a lot of resources because basically all your React application has to re-render because you receive a new payload, and this payload is used in a lot of places. But the thing is, often you fetch, for example, you refresh the user data, but most of the time the user data didn't change. It's quite it's not very often that the username or the avatar will change, and you are rendering on all the components in a useless way for when this happens. So how can we fix this? Actually, it's pretty simple. Instead of fetching an object from your backend, what you can do is fetch a record. So here I have just added a toggle so that I can fetch a record or an object if I change the value. So now instead of fetching an object, I'm going to fetch a record, sorry. And what you can see in this demo is that now the re-renders are much more less frequent. You can still see that the app is re-rendering every 5 seconds, because actually the age of the user Sébastien is increasing every 5 seconds. And you can see that the intermediate components also re-render every 5 seconds, and the user component re-render only every 5 seconds instead of every second. And the company, which the data of the company never change over time, you can see it never re-renders again, because actually as we converted the company to a record and the data of the company didn't change over time, the company component is able to optimize this rendering by understanding that the company prop didn't change. So this way, just converting objects to records when you fetch data from backend is able to optimize for free your React application, because you save a lot of free renders that you otherwise trigger unnecessarily. So actually, there is no current method to fetch a record from your backend. You have to convert it. So I have added some kind of conversion logic here to convert manually the payload from the backend. But in practice, I think in the specification they will add a method like response.json record, so that you can directly obtain a record from your backend. But I'm not sure it's specified yet. So we'll see in the future if it becomes available. So this is all for the demo. To conclude this talk, I'd like to explain a bit the trade-offs. So JavaScript with records and tuples, some people think that JavaScript will become more complex. I mean, somehow people don't like the hash syntax, because it will add a new syntax that people will have to learn. And it's becoming harder and harder to learn JavaScript, which is not anymore a toy language that people used to learn quite easily a few years ago. Also, there is a problem. For example, if you want to put a date in a record or any other non-primitive type, it's a bit complicated, but maybe you still want to do that. If you really want to do that, instead of putting the non-primitive type inside the record, you will have to put a reference of to the primitive type in the record, and then somehow cache the non-primitive type in a map somewhere else, like a bit like a database, so that you can reference the non-primitive type. But it's not very straightforward currently, so I don't know if it will become a problem in the future. The implementation details of the proposal are not specified, so this is just a language for now. Maybe we don't know exactly what are the performance impacts of using a record versus an object. So we will have to wait for browser vendors to propose implementation of this to see how performant it is, because maybe there will be a little performance overhead if you use a record instead of an object. And also there is the problem about the existing record TypeScript type, because we don't know how this will be managed, because we can't have two types with the same name. So we will have to find maybe a new name for the JavaScript record. So to conclude, I think records and tuples are very easy to use. And immutability is one interesting part, but the most important one is really the component primitive behavior, because it will solve a lot of use cases that we have in real world applications. I think I tried to explain some of the use case in a React application here, but it also has potential impacts in other frameworks as well. I don't know much other frameworks, but for example, I know that Angular has some there is something called change detection on push, which also leverage immutability. And I think records and tuples could be useful as well to optimize the performance of Angular applications, and also any other application that benefits from from the immutable data structures and using object identities to optimize things and things like that. So that's all for me. Thank you for listening to my talk. And if you have questions, you can ask me on Twitter now or maybe email me. I have written a blog post about recursive and tuples for React on my site. So if you want to take a look, you will have maybe a few more use cases for React. And maybe you'll find this interesting. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much. That was great. I can see some claps in the in the grid on the right-hand side. So yeah, people obviously really appreciate it. There was quite a lot of information to absorb, but this really exciting development in the JavaScript world. I've got a question just to kick off, Sebastien. So are you actually using records and tuples in production code?
No, not at all. No. This is a stage 2 proposal, so this is not. I mean, maybe when it will be stage 3, I think some people will use it. And although there is a polyfill currently, I don't know how performant it is, but it's clear. This is a kind of feature that you really need browsers to implement. I mean, it really depends on the application. Maybe you can try. There is a Babel transform today that you can use to actually run it in your application in production. But the thing is, the IDE support is not there. You don't have prettier. You don't have ASLint. There are a lot of things that you will lack if you try to use this today. Maybe you can, but I mean, for a real application, it's a bit complicated today until the tooling is supporting this.
Yeah, I thought that might be your answer. And in fact, when you were talking at the beginning, I just quickly tried it out in the Babel REPL, and it didn't seem to know what to do with it. So yeah, I guess you need the polyfill, right? Because basically, yeah it's not going to be understood. But yeah, okay, this is a really important thing for us at JavaScript Monthly to have insights into what's coming next in JavaScript that's really going to make our lives easier. So yeah, thanks again for the talk. It was great. Is anyone else on the call got any questions for Sebastien? Is everyone's mind blown? Everyone really pumped about using it. We're going to have to wait until it's stage 3.
Yeah, I'm waiting, but I think the stage 3 will. I'm not sure it will be very soon because it's a quite important proposal, and they are going to be careful to avoid that. It's easy when you work on JS proposals to have conflict with other proposals and things like that. So you really need to have the big picture of the whole language in head and all the existing proposals to be able to know if you are making the right choice in accepting it.
Yeah, no, it must be really, really difficult to manage all that through, given how quickly it's evolving. Okay, we got a couple of questions then. So Denise, she asks, to get the new goodies, how can we prevent use effect, Serenade and execute?
What does it mean, Serenader?
Yeah, I'm not okay, re-render, I think she meant. So how can we prevent a re-render?
But so as I've shown in the demo, you can just replace some objects with records and then you prevent the re-renders. But as you can't use this today, so it's a bit complicated to to solve your problem today. But I think, for example, there are a lot of tricks that you can use to avoid the re-renders. For example, you can use refs to pass them to re-render because the refs are stable. It permits you to somehow access fresh values from the effect without triggering a re-render. But it's a bit complicated, and I think that records and tuples will help solve a lot of problems like that in a more straightforward way. So this is why I'm quite excited about this.
Yeah, it's definitely something that we've needed for a while. Yeah, Jacob, with refs, there be dragons. Yeah. Okay, yeah, Denise. Yeah, I'm glad your question was answered. There was one further up. I mean, it was a comment, but I think we can turn it into a question. So Nia is asking about use memo. So, you know, does this potentially make some of that useless? You know, can we avoid having to use memo now?
Yeah, I think actually, yeah, this is a very good use case. So you can basically replace all your use memo by this, but for at least for the data, because sometimes you want to use memo. For example, you can create an API object which will contain callbacks, for example, to mutate the state. And in such case, as you can't put functions inside a record, you can't memorize an object which contains functions. So you can replace all your use memo for data this way, because if the data doesn't change, then the result of the record won't change either. But you can't do that if you try to use non-primitive types inside a record. So you still need to use memo in some case.
Yeah, brilliant. I think that was all the questions. So Jacob's posting some comments. State should not contain functions. I don't know if I can turn that into a question. I mean, we're almost at time
not a
now.
question.
Oh, go on then. Yeah.
No, I was just saying you should not actually encounter that problem because your state should not actually contain functions. If your state contains functions, you have a different problem. Yeah.
Actually, for example, if you look at the React hook use state, you have the first array item that is the state, and the second that is the set state function. And for example, if you create an API, for example, for a custom hook that has state and as an API, what I like to do is, for example, have the first item to be the state and then the second item to be the API. But the API is not always. You can make a better API than just exposing set state. You can create, for example, an API which contains a toggle method, a close method, and things like that. And in such case, I think use memo can be useful, for example, to memorize the second parameter, the API object, which contains the methods, because you also want this API object to be stable. Because if you, for example, pass the API object to a subcomponent, you don't want to trigger useless reminders to this component if it is memorized. So memorizing objects which contain functions, even it's not state, can be useful because you can express your API as an object somehow.
Yeah, awesome. I think that could be a topic for a whole other talk.
Yeah.
But yeah, brilliant. I think we should probably wrap up now so that we finish on time. If anyone has any more questions, hopefully you grabbed Sebastian's contact details. I can post them in the JS Monthly meetup page. So I'll do that for both speakers. So yeah, round of applause for Sebastien and also for Salma earlier, who spoke at the beginning. So yeah, many thanks both of you. Yeah, awesome. So good. So yes, we were going to close with, because we've reshuffled the agenda, the competition. So I'll just talk you through the event, who have very kindly given us those tickets. Hopefully you can see my screen. Yeah. Cool. So yeah, this is a new partnership with React Advanced London. It's a huge event. It's happening in October 22nd to 23rd of this year. Bravely, they are going to actually have people in a venue. but yeah, I imagine that's subject to to the current situation in the UK. But all being well, they expect to have people in the physical space, but also you can join online, understandably. Where they reckon there could be as many as 20,000 people attending. So pretty huge event. A couple of speakers that they called out are Kent C. Dodds, who I imagine you've come across, and also Sarah Vieira. Those are just two of, lots and lots of great speakers that they have. Really recommended. And as I say, very kindly, they have donated 2 tickets for us to give away. So I'm not going to make the question too hard. The rules are simply in the chat. The first 2 people to type the correct answer get the 2 tickets. So it's a little bit of a fastest finger first. I've just got something in the chat here. People are answering. Nice. Yeah, people are answering already. Awesome. Good answers, but that wasn't the question. Maybe it should have been. The question is, and I'm going to keep it on topic because we're talking about React. So the question is, what stable edition of React introduced hooks? Okay, so no alphas and betas. Which are, there you go, look at that. Near is super quick. Well, Sebastien, you're one of the speakers, so I wasn't necessarily including you in this. However, I actually got a ticket from the event, so I can give you mine because I don't think I can go to that. I'm away at the same time. So winners are Nir and Denise. So congrats to you 2. That was unbelievably quick. Actually, hang on. No, Denise, you put 16.6, which is not the right answer. So unlucky, but it was actually 16.8. Denise, was that a typo? Yes, it was. There you go. Yeah. So I will need your I'll need you to DM me your personal contact details. So in the chat, I'll stay on the call for a couple of minutes. In the chat, if you can just DM me your email address or phone number, whichever you prefer, and I will get those over to you as soon as I can. So we're done with the competition. Thanks again to our speakers. Let me come out of this. Thanks again to our speakers. Thanks again to you, Alex, for helping with all of the organization and technology. Really looking forward to seeing some of you again in our next event in July. That will also definitely be online, but as I say, I'll keep you posted about us doing ones in physical spaces again. Thanks for all your brilliant questions and participation. Have a great evening, everyone. Farewell.